My name is Margaret Hart, but everyone calls me Maggie. I am 68 years old, a widow, and I thought I had seen every kind of disappointment life could offer. I was wrong. I can still feel that moment at Boston Logan, standing in the middle of the departure gate with my suitcase by my side. Around me, families were laughing, hugging, shuffling passports, their eyes glowing with the excitement of holidays. And there I was, realizing I wasn't going anywhere. My daughter-in-law, Brooke, smiled as sweetly as ever, but her eyes gave her away. They sparkled with something sharp, something almost satisfied. She said there had been a mistake, that somehow my reservation was missing, but deep down, I understood there was no mistake. The ticket never existed. My son Dan avoided my gaze, as if the floor tiles were suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. That morning, I had paid for 5 first-class tickets, luxury hotels, guided tours, dinners the works. $33,000 gone in the name of family memories. And now I was standing there like an extra piece of luggage, quietly dismissed. The strange thing is, the first thought that came to me wasn't about the money. It was about belonging, about realizing I had been written out of the story before it even began. Most people might have broken down right there. But something in me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I chose not to react, but to respond. And that made all the difference. And that's where this story begins. Because the ride back home that morning gave me 47 minutes to decide how I was going to respond. Looking back, I know exactly why I agreed so quickly. After Robert passed away 5 years ago, the holidays felt different, quieter, emptier. So when my son Dan called me one afternoon with this idea of spending Christmas in Paris, I felt something light up inside me. He painted a picture of us walking down the Champs-Élysées with lights twinkling all around, sipping coffee at little cafes, and giving the kids memories before they grew too old to care. It sounded magical. And the truth is, I wanted to believe that they wanted me there. I wanted to feel needed again. Money has always been my way of showing love. I helped with mortgage payments when they were short, covered tuition gaps when the bills piled up, even slipped in grocery money when I noticed things were tight. I didn't keep score. I told myself I was simply supporting my family. So when the topic of cost came up, I didn't hesitate. I thought of it as an early Christmas gift. Brooke was quick to offer to handle the logistics. She said she was experienced with online bookings, that it would be easier if she took care of flights, hotels, and tours. Honestly, I was relieved. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, and the endless online forms and airline apps often leave me feeling clumsy. It felt like a kindness, and I accepted it without question. Deep down, though, a small voice whispered that the plan sounded too perfect. The price tag, $33,000, was steep for a family living on modest salaries. But love has a way of quieting reason. I convinced myself it was worth every penny for the joy of being included. At that point, I had no idea that the very act of trusting would become the opening move in a painful lesson. But even before we reached the airport, there were warning signs, subtle ones I brushed aside until it was too late. As the weeks went by, little signs began to appear. Whenever I asked Brooke about the hotel or the flight details, she would brush it off with a smile. She always said she had everything under control, that I shouldn't worry. At first, I told myself she was just being considerate, wanting to make the trip a surprise. Still, a part of me felt uneasy. I noticed how the confirmations never came directly to me, even though it was my card paying for everything. When I offered to help with research or asked about restaurants, she would quickly change the subject. It was subtle, but it left me feeling like a guest in my own gift. The moment that still lingers in my chest happened about a week before the trip. I had gone to the mall to pick up a few things: warm scarves, travel adapters, little items to make the journey smoother. As I was leaving, I spotted Brooke sitting with her sister in the food court. They didn't see me, but I heard just enough. I caught the tone more than the word: sharp, dismissive, as if I were a problem to be managed. I froze, holding my shopping bags, listening to Brooke laugh in a way that made my stomach sink. For a second, I wondered if I had misheard, if maybe I was being too sensitive. I stood there, heart racing, and convinced myself it was nothing. After all, who wants to believe that their own family is capable of planning something cruel? So, I pushed the doubt down. I told myself I was imagining things. I went home and packed my suitcase with more hope than sense. And when the morning of the flight arrived, I walked into Boston Logan carrying that hope, refusing to see what was already unfolding. The morning of the flight arrived, and I remember the excitement buzzing through the terminal. Families rushed around me, passports in hand, children bouncing with joy. I held my own suitcase tightly, trying to share in that same excitement. This was supposed to be our holiday together. But when we reached the counter, reality struck. The agent typed in my name, then looked at me with confusion. No reservation, no seat. I felt the air leave my chest as the truth settled in. Brooke was quick with her explanation, her voice light as honey, telling me something about a mix-up. But her eyes told a different story. There was no mistake. There had never been a ticket for me. What hurt most wasn't her words, but Dan's silence. My own son couldn't look me in the eye. He clutched his boarding pass, pretending to study it, pretending he didn't see his mother standing there, left behind. I could have cried, begged them to fix it, even offered to pay again on the spot. That would have been the old me, the one who always gave until she had nothing left. But instead, I felt something shift deep inside. I smiled, wished them a safe and wonderful trip, and stepped back. It wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of something else. As I walked away from the gate, the noise of boarding announcements and laughter blurred together. My heart ached, but my mind was clear. They had played their game, and I was finally ready to change the rules. By the time the cab dropped me home around 11:20 that morning, I had already decided. I wasn't going to react with tears or anger. I was going to respond with calm, deliberate action, and sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, I knew exactly where to start. When I walked back into my house, I set my suitcase down by the door and went straight to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at the table, and pulled out my laptop. The ache in my chest was still there, but beneath it was something sharper focus. I realized something important: every confirmation, every booking, every single charge had been made in my name, on my card. For years, my late husband Robert and I had kept meticulous records. Old habits don't fade, and I had every email Brooke ever sent me neatly saved in a folder. Hotel reservations, flight confirmations, restaurant bookings, private tours, everything was there. All under Margaret Hart. I started with the hotel, a lovely 5-night stay in Paris, 2 adjoining suites, flexible rate, cancel anytime. A few clicks later, the entire $3,800 was credited back to my account. Next were the flight's 5 business-class tickets from Boston to Paris. Expensive, nearly $3,900 each. Even with cancellation fees, I recovered about $14,000. Then the tours, the river cruise, the private guide at the Louvre, the day in Versailles. One by one, I canceled them. each email confirmation arriving like a small victory. As the refunds rolled in, I felt lighter. It wasn't about the money, it was about taking back the dignity they tried to strip from me at that gate. And then there was the letter, before they boarded. I had quietly slipped a note into Brooke's makeup bag. I didn't use harsh words. I simply told them that since I wasn't wanted on their trip, neither was my money. I wanted them to know the cancellations weren't an accident. They were a choice. The old me would have reacted in tears. The new me was learning the difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is impulsive. A response is permanent. And the beauty of a response is that it doesn't hit all at once. It unfolds, slowly, just as their dream vacation was about to collapse piece by piece. That night, my phone started buzzing not long after I had settled into bed. At first, it was one voicemail, then another, then a whole stream of them piling up as the hours passed. I didn't even need to listen right away to know the tone. I could imagine it: confusion at first, then panic, then the familiar edge of entitlement. Instead of answering, I turned the phone face down and made pancakes the next morning the way Robert used to love them, golden, with too much butter and real maple syrup. It felt strangely freeing to choose breakfast over chaos. The messages kept coming throughout the day. Dan sounded desperate, Brooke furious, the kids somewhere in the background. I let the phone buzz on the counter, each vibration a reminder that I wasn't their emergency fund anymore. But late the following night, something unexpected happened. The lobby phone number of a small Paris hotel flashed on my screen. When I picked up, it wasn't Dan or Brooke. It was Lily. Her voice was soft, hushed, like she was trying not to be overheard. She told me they were scared, confused, sitting in a shabby room with no clear plan. She admitted she hadn't known I was supposed to be on the trip. Her parents had told her something else entirely. Hearing the tremble in her words nearly broke me. She was 16, trying to make sense of adult betrayal. For a moment, the old me wanted to swoop in, to rescue everyone, to book them into comfort. But I stopped myself. I reminded her gently that this wasn't her fault, nor Noah's. It was the result of choices her parents had made. When I hung up, my heart ached. Yet I also knew I had to hold firm, because rescuing them now would only teach them that manipulation still worked. And just when I thought I had weathered the worst of it, the phone rang again with a call I never expected. 3 days later, the messages slowed down, but the tension did not. I received short, careful updates from Lily when she managed to sneak onto the hotel's lobby computer. They had moved into a smaller, dingier place because the nicer hotels were far out of reach. She told me the heat barely worked, the bathroom smelled of mold, and Brooke was unraveling under the weight of it all. Then came the call that froze me in place. A polite voice with a French accent introduced himself as an officer. My son, my daughter-in-law, and the children were being held at a local police station. Not for violence, not for danger, but because they had tried to leave the hotel without paying the bill. About 2,000 euros. He explained room charges and food. The children weren't in trouble, but they couldn't leave until the debt was cleared. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the wall, weighing two choices. I could stand firm, let the legal system handle them, and hope the embassy eventually intervened. Or I could step in, but only for the children's sake. My heart twisted at the thought of Lily and Noah sitting in a police station on Christmas week. In the end, I chose compassion. I paid the bill by card, but only the basic charges. No extras, no luxuries. I told myself this wasn't for Brooke or for Dan. It was for two kids who didn't deserve to suffer for mistakes they didn't make. But even as I gave that payment, I knew I had handed Brooke a map for future manipulation, and that realization cut deeper than the money itself. When the payment cleared, the officer assured me they would be released within the hour. I hung up, but instead of relief, I felt an unsettling heaviness. I had done what any grandmother would do. I had protected Lily and Noah. Still, I couldn't ignore what this meant. Brooke now knew the one button that could still move me the children. Not long after, Dan's voice returned to my phone, softer this time. He thanked me, cautious in tone, almost like he knew gratitude wasn't enough. I kept my response measured. I reminded him that I hadn't paid for him or Brooke, only for the kids. That was the truth, though I doubted he fully heard it. He told me his boss had agreed to advance him enough to cover economy flights, and that they would be back in Boston by Christmas Eve. Hearing that gave me a strange kind of peace. They had found their own way home. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of learning to stand on their own. But I also knew something else: this pattern had to end. If I didn't draw a permanent line, the cycle would repeat. That realization led me to take a step I had never considered before: bringing in the law to protect not only my money, but my future. The morning after their return flight, I sat in my living room with a quiet determination. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to fix things for Dan or Brooke. I was thinking about how to fix things for myself. I called my attorney, James Morrison, and asked for an appointment that same afternoon. Sitting across from him, I laid out the story from beginning to end: the $33,000 vacation, the humiliation at the gate, the voicemails, the police station call, and the way my money had been treated like an endless stream to tap. James listened carefully and then said words I had never considered: elder financial abuse. Hearing it framed that way hit me hard. Abuse. That's what it was. So we got to work. I created education trusts for Lily and Noah, protected accounts that only they could benefit from when the time was right. I removed Dan and Brooke as beneficiaries from my estate. The rest of my assets, my home, my investments, everything else would go to charities that I chose, organizations that valued me as more than a wallet. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter. For years, I had written checks without boundaries, hoping love would come in return. Now, for the first time, I had put boundaries in black and white, with the law standing behind me. And soon, those boundaries would be tested face to face, right in my own driveway. It didn't take long for the confrontation to arrive. A few days later, I looked out my front window and saw Brooke's car pull into my driveway. Lily stepped out first, her shoulders tense, her eyes full of quiet hope. Brooke stayed in the driver's seat, the engine still running. I stepped onto the porch, and she tried to engage me, her voice sharp, accusing, as though I had ruined their holiday. But I had no interest in sparring with her. I had nothing left to prove. I simply told her, calmly and firmly, that we had nothing to discuss. My boundaries were already set, and no argument in my driveway was going to change them. Lily walked toward me, and I put my arm around her shoulders as Brooke drove away in frustration. Later that week, Dan and Brooke came inside for what I called a family discussion. I laid it all out, not with anger, but with clarity. Over the last 5 years, I had given them more than $2,000 in mortgage payments, car loans, tuition help, vacations, and endless emergencies. And what had I received in return? Silence, entitlement, and in the end, humiliation. that pattern was over. I told them the education trusts were now secured for the children, but beyond that, the estate they counted on would no longer belong to them. My support had ended permanently. I watched Dan shift uncomfortably, finally realizing the weight of what I was saying. And Brooke, her fury was there. But so was fear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply held my ground. Because sometimes strength doesn't look like fighting, it looks like refusing to be moved. And with that, I stepped into the final chapter of this story, one of peace, freedom, and a new kind of love. 6 months later, I found myself back in the quiet of my garden, sipping coffee at 7:15 in the morning. The air was cool, the grass damp with dew, and for the first time in years, my heart felt light. A letter from Lily sat on the table beside me. She had been accepted into her first-choice college, her tuition already secured by the trust I had established. Noah called me every week to talk about his soccer games and the art projects he was working on. Their voices, their gratitude, their presence in my life that was worth more than any check I had ever written. Dan and I now have a distant but respectful relationship. He no longer calls asking for bailouts, and I no longer feel the pressure to provide them. As for Brooke, we do not speak at all. And that silence, surprisingly, feels like peace. Through all of this, I learned that true love never sends you an invoice. When you pay for belonging, all you are really buying is loneliness dressed up as obligation. If you've ever had to draw a hard line in your own family, know that you are not alone. Sometimes boundaries are the greatest gift you can give yourself and even the people you love. If this story resonated with you, I'd be honored if you shared your thoughts, liked this video, or left a comment with your own experience. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear today.